Alright, today we are in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Last time, in the last couple of chapters, chapter 11, really, we talked about how Paul goes through and lists all his different sort of credentials, things that he had suffered physically for Christ, for his faith in Jesus Christ, and how these other apostles are trying to these false apostles are trying to discredit his ministry and his work that he's done for Jesus, and saying that they should listen to them instead of Paul, and not to listen to Paul anymore. And Paul is worried about this church because he wants to see them, continue in their salvation, in their faith, and seeking the Lord, and wants that for them. And so he's trying to list for them and show them how his message is credited, because of the life that he's lived, the works that he's produced through his ministry, the fruit he's produced, and also the fact that he's endured through suffering for Jesus, and these other people haven't. So whatever they want to say about themselves, they could test it with their own lives and see if they match up. But Paul's defending himself just for the sake of defending Christ, not really to get himself glory, but so that they would believe the message that he preaches about glorifying Jesus Christ. So he lists, the different things that he suffered physically for Jesus. 5 different times. Received 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked, and so on and so forth, and all these different things. And then besides all this, I have my daily concern, my daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Worrying about whether or not they're still seeking the Lord and living it out. And so those are the physical things he suffered. Now we'll get in credentials of his life. And now we will get into chapter 12 and hear a little bit about the credentials he has by things that God has shown him. So in chapter 12, starting at verse 1, it says, "This boasting will do no good, but I must go on." You recognize this boasting isn't really doing any good, except for the fact that if I show you from my life that I'm real about what I preach, and I practice what I preach, and maybe you can believe this message and give God glory and grow closer to him and seek him through faith. So he says, "But I must go on. I will reluctantly tell about visions and revelations from the Lord. I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows." And so Paul, he in other translations here at this part, it says, "I know of a man." Paul writes, "I know of a man that was 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether he was in the body or out of the body, I do not know." But Paul's actually talking about himself. So in this translation, it translated as Paul speaking in the first person. So whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows. And verse 3 says, "Yes, only God knows whether I was in my body or outside of my body, but I do know that I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding that they cannot be expressed in words, things no human is allowed to tell." That is just amazing to me that Paul received these revelations and visions from God of heaven, of paradise, and heard things talked about in this place that no human is allowed to tell. Like, we can't. He said he can't speak on these things right now, because the things hidden that aren't going to be revealed till later. But God has given him insight on these things because he's that close to God. That's just amazing to me. Verse 5, that experience is worth boasting about. Of course it is, yeah. "But I'm not going to do it," he says. "I will boast only about my weaknesses." And in a sense, he didn't really boast about it, because he talks about in third person how I know of a man that was taken up in the third heaven and received visions, revelations, and seen things that man can't even talk about, and so forth. And so he says, I'm not going to boast about that, but I will boast only about my weaknesses. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so, because I'd be telling the truth. He's not going to be boasting, trying to talk himself up and convince you of things that he's done for the Lord that he hasn't really done. his boasting really would be justified if he wanted to boast in that sense, because he's speaking the truth. This thing's really happened. He's just telling you what happened to him, and how his relationship with God is. He says, but I won't do it because I don't want anyone to give me any credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. He says, I'm not going to boast about these different things. I could go on and really astound you by the types of things that God has shown me. But instead, I don't want you to give me any credit beyond what you can just see in my life. I want you to be able to look at my life and say, that's how I want to live, and live out from his example. So, he says, even though I've received such wonderful revelations from God. So, to keep me from becoming proud, he says, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me or buffet me and keep me from becoming proud. So God, he's given him these visions of heaven that are so astounding. Like, he's heard things that no other man has ever heard. That they can't even repeat. He can't even repeat these things and teach these things because they're so just incredible. These mysteries that have been revealed to him and revelations that he's gotten from God, and it's gotten to the point where it's so heavy that he's in danger of becoming exalted above measure, like almost thinking of himself as not human anymore. Maybe I'm so close to God, I may be like an angel or something, and maybe this pride could swell up into the point of like it did with Satan. He thought he was so close to God that he could be like God, and this pride ended up destroying him. And so God didn't want that for Paul, and so he says, I received a thorn in my flesh, something to constantly buffet him, and buffet on him, just eating at him all the time, to constantly remind him, you're only human, you're only human, you're only human. He says, three different times I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time he said, my grace is all you need, my grace is sufficient, my power works best in weakness. Why does he say that? Because the more humble we are, realize that we need to be dependent and stay dependent upon God for everything, the more in need of God we are, the more his power can work through us. And if we get to the point where we've received so much from God that we get proud of our relationship with God, and that pride starts to separate us from God. So the very thing that brought us to God ends up separating us from God, our relationship. And so with Paul, he says, what? My power is made perfect in weakness. And so if you accept this suffering, this thorn in your flesh, and you just continue to worship me and seek me through it, but have this to keep you humbled, to keep you broken, and so that I can continue to work in you and through you, then that will make my power will work best and be perfect in you. And so Paul says, so now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. This is amazing to see Paul's heart. And obviously he could say, God, I don't care about your power being perfect in me, or being even better than it is. I just want this taken away. Please just take it from me. But he said, oh, okay, well, your power is made perfect in my weakness. Then make me weak and keep me broken, he says. And so I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. And that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses, and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, he is strong. And so and he is strong in me. Or in another sense, when I'm weak, then I am strong. For we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And the weaker we become, the stronger he becomes in us. And we can do all things through that strength within us that Christ gives us. And so that's why we go through times where we purposely try to weaken our flesh as Christians by fasting and praying and having seasons like that where we weaken our flesh and strengthen our spirit, so that Christ can be made perfect in our weakness and our physical weakness of suffering through fasting and hardships and troubles and anything that we suffer for Christ. And sometimes taking up your cross and following the Lord and suffering in that way can just mean not feeding your flesh when it's hard not to, and deciding that you're going to glorify God with your life and deny yourself by watching R-rated movies because you know it hurts the heart of God, or listening to music that has cuss words or talks about women inappropriately or things like that, regardless of whether or not you think it's that big of a deal, but that's taking up your cross and choosing to do the hard things, even the small things in life, to honor God in every way. And for when I am weak, when we're weak in those areas and we realize it, then God can become strong in us, and we need to become um, mentally weak to the point where we realize that none of our wisdom and nothing that we can do on our behalf is anything compared to what God can do through us. And all true wisdom comes from God anyways. And so to humble ourselves like little children is to say, God, I want you to run my life. And I'm coming to you humble as a child, like I know nothing, God, and I just want you to teach me, God, and speak through me, and just let it be all to you all the time. Verse 11 says, You have made me act like a fool by all this boasting that he's had to do. You ought to be writing commendations for me, for I am not at all inferior to these super apostles, even though I am nothing at all. And you recognize I'm nothing at all. I'm just dust. We're all just dust in these bodies, but we are spirits that live forever. But all of our spirits are just that. They're spirits that God created. He is the one that gets the glory. We're nothing. When I was with you, I certainly gave you proof that I am an apostle, for I patiently did many signs and wonders and miracles among you. The only thing I failed to do, which I do in other churches, was to become a financial burden to you. Please forgive me for this wrong. And Paul says, and this is where we get all the credentials that you need, the three things that you need for sure to consider yourself, or for others to consider you as an apostle. We know from 1 Corinthians and from 2 Corinthians that we put all these scriptures together that he talks about how I am certainly an apostle, and the proof is, he says, you are the proof, for one, meaning that the first credential is that you have to plant churches. You have to have planted churches to be an apostle. Second, he says, I've met the resurrected Lord. I've had a face-to-face encounter with the risen Lord. So you have to have a face-to-face encounter with the risen Lord, physically meet and see with your own eyes the resurrected Jesus Christ. And three, what he just said here, I certainly gave you proof that I am an apostle, for I patiently did many signs and wonders and miracles among you. You have to work signs and wonders and miracles in your ministry to people, and those three things make you an apostle. It says, But I never became a financial burden to you. Please forgive me of this wrong. Now I am coming to you for the third time, and I will not be a burden to you. I don't want it. I don't want what you have. I want you. After all, children don't provide for their parents. Rather, parents provide for their children. I will gladly spend myself and all I have for you, even though it seems that the more I love you, the less that you love me. Some of you admit I was not a burden to you, but others still think I was sneaky and took advantage of you by trickery. But how? Did any of the men I sent to you take advantage of you? When I urged Titus to visit you and sent our brother with him, did Titus take advantage of you? No. For we have the same spirit and walk in each other's steps, doing the same things. Perhaps you think we are saying these things just to defend ourselves. No, we tell you this as Christ's servants. And with God as our witness, he says, everything we do, dear friends, is to strengthen you. For I am afraid that when I come, I won't like what I find, and you won't like my response. I am afraid that I will find quarreling, jealousy, anger, selfishness, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorderly behavior. Yes, I am afraid that when I come again, God will humble me in your presence, and I will be grieved because many of you have not given up your old sins. You have not repented of your impurity, sexual immorality, and eagerness for lustful pleasures. It's crazy how worried Paul is about others and their spiritual walk because he sees how serious this is. I pray that we all begin to take it more seriously. So next time we'll get into the last chapter, chapter 13, and then after that we'll start the next book. And so until then, God bless you.